Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second Leonard Cohen first listen of this Leonard Cohen special weekend. And before I dive into it, let me just remind you to check out my Ko-fi and Patreon if you're interested, because I have all kinds of fun things there. Music that I can't post here on YouTube because of copyright issues, as well as live gatherings where we listen and discuss music together. Check it out if you're interested. And let's see what I have to hear today of Leonard Cohen's music. Oh, by the way, Vlad told me that Leonard Cohen has a lot of great hits, and it was a bit tricky for him to choose what the second piece for this weekend would be. He finally settled on this one, which is Who by Fire. And his reason for it, as he told me, is that it has a story behind it that will tell me a bit more about Leonard Cohen himself. So let's see what I have to learn. In 1973, Leonard Cohen was 39, living on Hydra with photographer Suzanne Elrod and their child.
No connection.
No connection. Okay. He was a cult favorite. In France, it was said that if a girl had only one album, it was his. But he was miserable. He felt trapped by his family. He found relief only with women and drugs. Then, on Yom Kippur, Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack on Israel. Cohen rushed to Israel. He intended to volunteer on a kibbutz. He'd help with the harvest while others went off to fight. How little he knew. It wasn't harvest time. He could be more useful, he was told, if he'd entertain the troops. He balked. He had no guitar, his songs were sad, he was a pacifist. His objections were brushed aside. He was drafted into the Musicians' Brigade. What a story. In the 19-day war, Cohen lived with soldiers, slept on the ground, ate combat rations, sang for as few as a dozen men, then rode in a van to the next gathering, performing a few songs 8 times a day. But even if you're just performing for a few people, 8 times a day is a bit of an overload. Fortunately, the war didn't last too long, right? I came to raise their spirits, he said, and they raised mine. It could be no other way. His signature tone was seriousness, urgency, the eternal. I kind of gathered that from the first song I did yesterday, which was Suzanne. In Israel, the environment matched his message. After each concert, the men went back to war. He knew his music might be the last thing they heard, Matty Friedman writes. This isn't Woodstock. It isn't a night out. Everyone's sober. The stakes are high. Of course he sang Suzanne, and it was a healing. But maybe even more helpful were 2 songs he wrote in Israel. He closed a show with one of them. I said to myself, perhaps I can protect some people with this song. That song is Lover, Lover, Lover. Well, maybe that's one that I need to listen to sometime in the future. The second song is Who by Fire. That's what I'm listening to. It addresses the central question of Yom Kippur. In the year ahead, what is written for me? There's no question more personal and more solemn. For soldiers who are facing that question every day of the war, it commands silence and reflection. The title of the album itself evokes the cyclical nature of life. As new creatures are born and begin the journey everyone must embark on towards the end. Who by Fire is more direct, packing imagery of various demises into the song's tight 2-minute 32-second runtime. The title is in a reference to the Untana Tokef Kedushat Hayom. Oh, dear. I'm sorry. I don't pronounce Hebrew well at all. A Hebrew prayer chanted on Yom Kippur. The prayer is said to have been written by a rabbi dying from his wounds after he was put to death for his unwillingness to convert. Where Untana details causes of death typical for holy texts, such as stoning, plague, flood, Cohen's bounces between times, asking who by high ordeal, a form of trial in the medieval period such as trial by combat, before switching to modern parlance in the next stanza. Who in her lonely slip, who by barbiturate. Blending these methods indicates the timelessness and ubiquity of death throughout history. In Hydra, Cohen felt his music was at a dead end. He thought he should retire. In Israel, in the presence of death, he found a new purpose. Well, that is an interesting backstory to this piece of music, and now I'm eager to hear. So let's do that. Minor, right from the beginning.
And who by a fire, who by a water, who in the sunshine, who in the nighttime, who by high ordeal, who by common trial, who in your merry, merry month of May, who by very slow decay, and who shall I say is calling? And who in her lonely slip, who by barbiturate.
I just realized both of these songs to this point, I haven't even mentioned his voice. Leonard Cohen's voice. It is very nice. I like it. It's a very natural sounding voice. It doesn't sound like he's even trying to sing, really. It just seems to fall out of him. And at the same time, there's a lot of resonance and melody to it. Not contrived, as I said, very natural. And I like that. I like that.
And who in her lonely slip, who by barbiturate, who in these realms of love,
I like those deep bass notes there, kind of supporting from underneath.
by avalanche, who by powder, who for his greed, who for his hunger, and who shall I say is calling? And who by
It's so subtle. It's so conservative in its way of expressing these ideas. But sometimes subtle and conservative and understated is the most powerful way to communicate something. We feel the impact even more strongly than if somebody were screaming it out in the most colorful language in front of us. It's as if somehow keeping it contained, restrained, allows it to seep deeper into us and become absorbed in our own being, rather than assaulting us from the outside and coming to a hard stop right here. That's how I feel about it. And as I'm listening, I want to go back and listen because there are little things happening. It's a short piece. Let's go back to the beginning. It starts out with this, when he plucks the chords, it's as if he's plucking with his nails a bit, and then the accompaniment flows a bit more smoothly between. It gives a little bit of feeling of well, there's an ominous quality to it. There's the feeling of impending something, we don't know what yet. And I like this fading away, nice diminuendo. And then out of that comes his voice. And who? And this and. It overlaps so nicely with that And who? And then the big surprise are the other voices behind it, which immediately gives it a sort of communal prayer-like quality, as if it were a prayer being spoken by a group.
And who by a fire, who by a water,
And that guitar.
who in the sun.
Dum bum dum bum dum bum bum bum. It supports the upper voices. It's as if we have a guitar with Cohen's voice and a guitar with the upper voices, and they're all working together, but it's as if one is the leader and the others are following his lead in this prayer.
And who by a fire, who by a water, who in the sunshine, who
Notice how
in
each
the
of these
nighttime,
is a question, and it's
by highway
musically
deal,
placed as a question.
who by common
Rising.
trial, who in your merry, merry month of May, who by very slow decay, and who shall I say
And then this choir in the background
is calling?
kind of holding it out. And then here come the strings, this very
In her lonely slip,
panoramic.
who by bar,
Yes, and what is this?
and who in her lonely slip, who by barbiturates.
It says in her lonely slip. There's some notes plucked up there.
In her lonely slip, who by barbiturate,
It doesn't sound like a note. It sounds more like a spoon striking on a glass.
who by something blunt, who by avalanche, who by powder, who for his greed, who for his hunger, and who shall I say is calling?
You know, one of the things that attracts me to this piece of music, and I guess also the one I listened to yesterday, Suzanne. I've mentioned this a few times with other pieces of music as well. I enjoy music that gives me a sense of height and depth, breadth and depth, this multi-dimensional. I enjoy music that I feel like I could walk inside and start reaching up, reaching down. And it's not merely, I'm not talking about how it's recorded, if it's recorded here and there and so forth. I'm talking about the notes, the pitches, the instrumentation, all of that. This piece of music has a lot of that going on. We have the deep bass tones. We have the high vocal tones. We have the middle ground covered by the guitar rippling accompaniment. And we have various textures. The ching, pluck. We have the sweep of the strings, or the ooh, threading of a needle with the choir. We have this more recited quality. Who by fire? Who by water? Who in the sunshine? Who in the nighttime? Which, as I said, has a sort of communal quality to it. But it also has a different texture because it's a group of voices, and it also has this kind of chopped up quality, which is a really great contrast to the rippling of the guitar accompaniment or the sweep of the strings, or this stringing along of the choir on the high pitches. And maybe you can see with my hands as I'm listening, I'm pointing here, there, down. I'm not talking about the stereo quality of what I'm listening to in my ears. I'm talking about the multidimensionalism found within the different parts and textures of the music itself. And that is something that I really enjoy when I find it in a piece of music. And to me, it's just incredibly rich and satisfying and engaging.
Shall I say?
We have everything down here. We have up here. And then we have a little bit of something percussion.
By brave ascent, who by accident, who
More is happening.
solitude,
You hear a little bit of
who in this mirror,
fingering on the
who by his
squeaking.
latest command, who
and the
by his own
rhythm
hand,
starts to really
who
carry us along.
in mortal chains, who
The bass,
in
da-da-da.
power, and who shall I say is calling?
Again, you listen to the textures, some short, some long. There is something in there that is like a spoon striking on glass. I don't know exactly what it is, but it is not a guitar note. I heard it again here. Right there. What a great way to end the piece. This is one of the most outstanding endings to a piece that I've heard on this journey. There are things about this piece that make me recall something like Child in Time. The way it builds and brings us to a point and then stops us right there. And then we go a little bit more. That's reminiscent of something like Child in Time that had this massive crescendo and then cut it off and then we built again. But, of course, this isn't so dramatic. It's not supposed to be. As I said, this is something that is contained and subtle and understated. But why do I say that this ending is so memorable to me? It's because all the way through this piece of music, he's been building through the rhythm of the text. Who by fire, who by water. And so much of what we hear in the music build-up is built up from what's happening in the text itself. Who in her lonely slip, who by barbiturate, who in these realms of love, who by some, and so it goes on, and it's all questions. Who's going to be called, in what way, and who shall I say is calling. And then as we get to the end, we have this really climactic build-up in this last verse. Who by brave ascent, who by accident, who in solitude, who in this mirror, who by his lady's command, who by his own hand, who in mortal chains, who in power, and who shall I say is calling. That is the climactic final verse. And then how do you end something like this? Like that? How do you bring it to a close and keep the question going? And what he did is great. He used the instruments. He thinned out the orchestration. He took out a lot of the extra resonance around all that was going on. but we still hear in what's being played the same rhythms, the same questioning. And so the instruments are continuing this questioning wordlessly so that the questions continue into infinity. And we're never given an answer to all of these questions. It's such a great... Let's hear this last bit again. In fact, let's hear the whole last verse because it's such a wonderful build-up and then closing without actually bringing to a close the questioning.
Who by brave ascent, who by accident, who in solitude, who in this mirror, who by his latest command, who by his own hand, who in mortal chains, who in power, and who shall I say is calling?
Hear the question? Who shall I say is calling? Here's the question. Here's the... Who's calling? I love it. I think it's great.
How about the live version of it?
Oh, sure. My first Leonard Cohen immersion weekend, and I have to say that I have enjoyed it immensely. There are a lot of things about his music that really appeal to me, and I'll be telling Vlad that I would enjoy some more Leonard Cohen in the future because this is going to be fun to explore more of his work. And, well, he's a fine musician, isn't he? And poet. Let's not forget that, because I almost feel like his time as a poet before digging into the music was somehow very musically developmental to him. I don't know if anyone asked him that question anywhere along the way, and unfortunately, it seems I'm a bit too late to ask him that question. But there's so much about the way his music explores the rhythmic and melodic elements embedded in the lyrics and pulls it out and gives it to us in so many different ways and enhances what we have in the text. That's just an idea that I have in my mind. What a fun weekend. I'll see you all soon.